Chapter 10 in SUPERENERGY. God and Energy. In ancient India, yogis recognized that there was an ultimate creative principle underlying everything. They called it Brahma. In science, the ultimate creative principle underlying everything is called energy. In Christianity, the ultimate creative principle underlying everything is called God. Brahma and God are attributed with consciousness and intelligence. But the difference between Brahma and God is that in Christian theology, God is placed outside of the universe, whereas in the Indian tradition of yoga, which means union, there is no separation. In Indian philosophy, Brahma is not separate from the universe. Brahma is at one with the dynamic state we call energy. There is a hint of commonality between the dynamic state we appreciate as energy and the source commonly called God. It is apparent in the definitions of energy in science and God in religion. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. God is neither created nor destroyed. Energy is everywhere. God is everywhere. Energy is in everything. God is in everything. Energy is all might. God is almighty. Everything comes from energy. Everything comes from God. In the Bible, the Gospel of John opens with the verse, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Word is sound, sound is vibration, vibration is energy. So the first verse of John's Gospel could read, "In the beginning was the energy, and the energy was with God, and the energy was God." This translation of the first verse of the Gospel of John suggests unity between God and energy. If God is defined as universal consciousness, and energy is the expression of consciousness, this verse supports that union. However, while God and energy may appear to be in union, there seems to be a distinction implied by the Word being God, but also being with God. This distinction is also in the idea that particles of energy are more thoughts than things. If the universal consciousness underlying everything is the thinker, and the particles of energy are the thoughts, then it could be argued that the thoughts are not the thinker, they are expressions of the thinker. Believers in God might say energy is of God, it is not God. So where does the concept of simultaneous union combined with distinction come from? It comes from the non-substantial nature of reality. It comes from the non-substantiality of the universe that we live in. Thoughts are not things. Thoughts have no material substance. If we believe there is a great thinker imagining the thoughts that constitute the universal mind, we cannot assume that the great thinker is substantial. This is because substantiality has been dispelled as an illusion. Without substance, the great thinker would exist only by virtue of thinking. If it were not a substantial being thinking, what could it be but the state of thinking, or the capacity to think? If the capacity to think ceased to think, it would cease to be, as would the thought. Thoughts depend on the thinker for their existence, but a non-substantial thinker would also depend on a continual stream of thoughts for its existence. Thinker and thought would always coexist. They would be in a state of total codependency. They could not be separate. In yoga or union, there would be two aspects of the same codependent reality. The thinker would be the internalized source of thought, and the thought would be the externalized expression of the thinker. When we drop the idea of substantial being, we are left with the idea of states of being. If we break away from the anthropic projection of a substantial being with the capacity to think, we are left simply with the capacity to think being the state of being. So I'll read that again. If we break away from the anthropic projection of a substantial being with the capacity to think, we are left simply with the capacity to think being the state of being. The traditional idea of God as a sentient being with a capacity to think is a projection of our perception of ourselves as sentient beings with capacities to think. If one universal mind exists purely as the capacity to think, it would be simultaneously the thinker of all sentient beings and the capacity to think in all sentient beings. So I'll read that again. If the one universal mind exists purely as the capacity to think, it would be simultaneously the thinker of all sentient beings and the capacity to think in all sentient beings. We are conscious, and we have the capacity to think and be aware. If God is the capacity to think and be aware, then our capacity to think and our conscious awareness would be God. To think a universe into existence would require more than conscious awareness. It would require intent to imagine every quantum vortex and quantum wave train of energy into being. We cannot begin to comprehend that level of thinking, but we see it operating in ourselves. We all have the willpower of intent, also called free will. We can intend things into being. This is a capacity attributed to God. We can create, and creation is attributed to God. We can love, and God is love. These are attributes of the all that is, which include consciousness and thinking, joy and life, reason and ingenuity. All these values expressed externally by finite human beings are attributes of the infinite mystery called God, residing in each one of us. Once we abandon materialism, instead of imagining God as a being lording over us as miserable little beings, we could imagine God as the inner divine attributes of loving, living, joy, and feeling we share in the commonality of being human with every other human being. From that perspective, the one God would be what we are internally, and the many bodies of mankind would be what we are externally. In other words, we would be the one being in the many bodies. That is the brotherhood and the sisterhood of humankind. In the Bible it is written, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46, verse 10. If God is our I am presence, the essence of who we really are, then we would be God experiencing and expressing as the one life in many human beings. If God is treated as life, everything begins to make sense. One life is common to us all and to all sentient beings. No one can say for sure what life is. From near-death experiences, we know human life survives death. It is a breakthrough in our understanding of life to appreciate it survives death. Near-death experiences help us to appreciate life as a ubiquitous principle that animates all organisms and brings them into existence, sustains them, and then destroys them only to regenerate them all over again. Hindus appreciate creation, preservation, and destruction, leading back to creation as the endless cycle of life attributed to God. If the capacities we call God come from within us, it would make sense to seek God not outside of ourselves, but within ourselves. This is the purpose of meditation. It is the way of yoga. It is the intent of the Buddhist chant, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. As human beings, we epitomize the relationship between God and energy. What is internal to us, our conscious awareness and our ability to think, create, love and reason, and our intent or free will, is our inner God aspect. What is external to us, our individual bodies, our genetic predispositions, and our soul personalities, is our energy signature. Taken together, what is external and what is internal makes us the sentient human beings that we are. Hu is an ancient Egyptian word for God or the divine. Hermes was an Egyptian teacher who founded the ancient Greek civilization 3 generations after Moses. He taught that we are divine beings in mortal bodies. This is why he called us human beings. So I'll repeat that. Hermes was an Egyptian teacher who founded the ancient Greek civilization 3 generations after Moses. He taught that we are divine beings in mortal bodies. That is why he called us human beings. In the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum reality, is taken to exist. In the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum reality, reality is taken to exist only to the extent it is observed. Quantum particles of energy exist only to the extent they are observed by conscious awareness. If materialism is abandoned, the philosophy that God or the atom pre-exist activity, then conscious awareness cannot be assumed to pre-exist the quantum it is aware of. In philosophy, pre-existence is a problem. Imagine a creator in an eternal void before the universe began thinking, today I will create a universe. There is a pre-existence problem with that idea. Space and time belong in the universe. Properties of the universe cannot be attributed to anything existing before the universe began. Voids and beginnings are attributes of space and time. They can only occur within a universe that already exists. The position that they occurred before the universe existed, before space and time began, is a logical absurdity. The idea that God existed before the universe makes no sense in relativity physics. If time is relative to the speed of light, it cannot pre-exist energy. If time is a measure of the relationships between entities in the universe, it cannot exist without those entities. The universe cannot have a beginning or an end. It could not have begun some 13.5 billion years ago. If there was a Big Bang, it must have been preceded by a big crunch. Think about it. The protons that make up the universe are trillions of years older than the universe itself. Protons have been around for at least 1 billion trillion years. And that is just an estimate. In mathematic parlance, is 10 to the 33 years. As spontaneous proton decays have never been observed, though scientists are constantly looking out for them, protons could have been around for a lot longer. Until a spontaneous proton decay is observed, they can be presumed to be eternal. How can the particles that make up the universe be trillions of years older than the universe itself? There are serious metaphysical problems in regard to believing in a God that preceded the universe, or believing the universe began with the Big Bang. It is more likely that the Big Bang was just one of many phases of universal expansion and contraction. Sages in India speak of a periodic expansion and contraction of the universe. They call it the breath of Brahma. Yoga is union. Yoga is the union of the inner reality of consciousness and the outer reality of the observed universe of energy. In yoga, there is no separation between energy and consciousness. As my daughter Jessica, a teacher of yoga teachers, said, everything goes back to yoga. If we tread the path of yoga, we will come to know from personal experience that there is no division between God and the universe. We will appreciate from our inner knowing the union of God and energy. This is the gnosis. Yoga in the East and the gnosis in the West are both concerned with our coming into the knowledge of our inner divine self, which is the self of everyone else and the source of the universe. Thank you very much for listening.